such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's case is about missing hunters who became prey for local killers. Now, when an entire town goes silent over the disappearance of two men, investigators knew that they were onto something, yet they had no idea that it would take almost 2 decades to get the truth. I also want to thank today's sponsor, which is Storyworth. Now, they actually create these beautiful books that are memory books that are the perfect way to not only learn about your family, but be able to keep it and have it forever to show off to all of the different generations to come. Storyworth makes it so easy. All you do is choose whoever you want the stories to be written by. So whatever family member or friend, I chose my grandparents, and every single week, those people will get an email from Storyworth, and it will have some sort of question like, how was your childhood? What's your favorite childhood memory? Who is the person that you looked up to the most? Anything like that. It's a variety of different questions, and the great thing is if you don't like their pre-picked questions, you can create your own to send. And then after a year of doing this, you can get a book. So then it comes with a book, which I have the one that I created right here. These are my grandparents. They're adorable. But basically there is this whole book worth of memories. It's just really cool to have a whole written book by them. And you can also get as many copies as you want. So you can give one back to them. You can give one to other people in your life. It's just an incredible gift for the holidays. If you think that somebody in your life would love this, you just have to go to storyworth.com/Brooke Mckenna. And if you go to the link in my description, that link, then you will get $10 off your first purchase. And if you don't know, it is my absolute passion to tell these stories. I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if that's something that you would like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on, giving this video a thumbs up, and leaving a nice comment down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1985 in Michigan, and David Kenneth Till and Brian George Ogden were two 27-year-old best friends. They had known each other since childhood when they met at a Boy Scout camp and became inseparable after that. They didn't really fight. They were just the best of friends that did everything together. But by this time, when they were 27, they were still very close, but they were living in 2 different cities. David was in St. Clair Shores with his wife, Denise, and he was working as a machinist at this time, whereas Brian was in Detroit. He had an on-again, off-again girlfriend, and he worked as a mechanic. Now, this was only 20 minutes apart, but it felt like forever for these best friends that literally wanted to spend 24/7 together. However, David's family did have a cabin, which was in White Cloud. Now, this was at least 3 hours away in the middle of nowhere on Baseline Road, but was perfect for a snowy weekend getaway, which they would often have. David's family was pretty much always there. They would like to go during hunting season. All of the men would kind of go as this, men's trip away, and David and Brian were asked to go. Now, these 2 strong men, along with all of the other men that would normally go, didn't fear being in this cabin in the woods during the snow season at night because they really didn't have that internal fear that most women do of being so far away from help. So they were very excited to go, and they planned to head out on the afternoon of Friday, November 22nd, and return that Sunday, November 24th. It was just a weekend getaway, and they were rearing to go. Now, David would be the one driving the 2 of them. He actually had a 1980s black Ford Bronco with the license plate number of 447HRZ. Between the 2 of them, they took enough cash to be able to survive over the weekend. It was about $140 in cash after they would cash in their check that was worth $50 at a local bank. Now, that same day, they actually headed to Mayo, Michigan before they went to White Cloud, where the cabin was. And this was actually kind of out of the way of the cabin. It wasn't a straight shot. They would kind of have to go further up and then head back down. Now, they wanted to go to Mayo regardless because they knew it was a fun place to be. One of their friends had lived there, and they just wanted to not only see friends, but also knew that there were a ton of bars in the area where they could meet people and possibly just have a good time. This put them going from Detroit to Mayo, which was about 5 hours, and then going back down to White Cloud, where the cabin was, which was another 2.5 hours away. So it was a significant difference and a lot more time on their trip, but neither of them minded. The weekend came and went, and when the two of them were scheduled to come back home, the Ford Bronco never pulled into either of their driveways. By the next morning, the family knew that something horrific had happened. Brian's girlfriend, Janice, the one who was on again, off again, called the state police and actually asked if there had been an accident with this Ford Bronco. The state police said that they hadn't found anything with that vehicle, but they would keep looking. And David and Brian were immediately reported missing. But the problem was only David could officially be filed as missing because Brian's girlfriend was the one trying to file it, and since she wasn't officially family, they wouldn't report him missing. Newspapers quickly picked up the story about these two hunters who had disappeared without a trace. Investigators had found that the check that they had cashed was cashed back in St. Clair Shores, so basically where one of them lived. And then at that point, they were really just looking for witnesses. They were in high demand from investigators. They wanted to talk to anyone to see if they had seen the men or the vehicle this weekend. The problem was when investigators would go to the White Cloud cabin, it turned out that they had never made it there either. Now, David's family, like I said, often went to the cabin as well, and they were already there. This was his brothers, his father, and some of his brother's friends. So there was actually a lot of people there, and they said that they were going to wait for them. But then that Friday, David had actually called and said that they probably wouldn't be there till Saturday, so they weren't really worried about it until then Sunday came and they still weren't there. Those at the cabin weren't really concerned. They thought maybe David and Brian found something that interested them more and that they went to do that instead. They were grown men after all, and they knew that they probably just wanted to have a good time and they could do that anywhere. So that is when investigators thought maybe they had actually never made it to the cabin because something had happened on their first trip to Mayo. So they headed there and they couldn't find anyone who had seen them that weekend or knew where they went. It was also found that neither Brian nor David had actually bought the hunting licenses, which is what they were going to do at the cabin. They had all decided they were going to go deer hunting, and they had never bought their license. Both families believed that foul play had to be involved, but there was nothing that could prove that this was true. And everything about this trip to Mayo was so secret that it was an entire mystery where they had actually gone or if they even made it there. They eventually found a witness who said that these two men were at a bar called Walker's Bar, and this witness was named David Welch. So we'll call him Welch so you don't confuse him with the David that is missing. Now, this was Saturday. This man, Welch, said that he was heavily drinking. He was drinking every day during the time that they were there, and so he was said to be very unreliable. However, he did say that he had seen them Saturday at about 9 or 10 p.m., so they were still there that night, according to him, and he said that he talked to them and they were both staying at the Mediteurs Hotel, and this was in the next town over. They also said they were going to go hunting too. However, they were also looking for women at the bar to take home to the hotel, or at least Brian was. The main thing investigators took from Welch's information, though, was the fact that he said the men didn't want to go to the cabin that they had with their family. They were both kind of saying that they would rather stay there and go to the bars. And at that point, it was found by both David and Brian's families that neither of these men were big hunters. They were actually ones who would just go to these cabins on these trips to be social, to be nice, but they hadn't ever killed a deer. They didn't want to. They weren't really even outdoorsy men. David even allegedly said that it would be nice to just up and disappear. Hearing all of of this, Welch said that he offered to take the men to a different bar, which was better luck with women than the Walker's bar they were at. And David actually stayed there where he continued drinking, but Brian went with Welch. When they returned, David had actually been cut off by the bartender saying that he had too much to drink, and so that is when they actually left the bar. But again, since Welch was unreliable, they didn't know whether they should sway their investigation this way or not, make it go completely in this direction of these two men were not wanting to go to the cabin, they were staying in this hotel, they wanted to see more women, or to go a completely different way. 2 weeks later, the local sheriff came into town and he was hoping he could find somebody to corroborate Welch's story. He said that he was actually able to talk to the owner of the Walker's bar. Her name was Beverly, and she did admit that Brian and David were there on that Saturday. Beverly said that she was the one who told the bartender to cut David off because he had way too much to drink. She said that they both left around 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. However, that is not all she had to say, because she then said they were also there on Sunday. This was the first time investigators had ever heard of a sighting of them on Sunday. Beverly claimed that they had come back in to get beer and a soda. She even had a piece of evidence, really, that she didn't know was evidence at that time, because it was the flannel jacket that she believed that David had left. She ended up giving this to the sheriff, and she said she knew nothing more. However, another bar's employee did. This was a bar called Linker's Bar, and a woman named Cindy had said that she believed it was about Saturday night when she had served them. The bar was so busy, and so it was really unusual for her to even remember that certain customers were there, but she said that she had witnessed something that made her really, focus in on who these men were. She said that Brian had gotten up to go to the bathroom, and David then paid for the drinks while he was away, and when Brian came back, he was kind of upset that David had paid for the drinks because he wanted to do so. So he had told Cindy that if she took David's money, then he would have to kill her. He was obviously joking, or she thought that he was, but he was kind of aggressive. He was drunk, and so she got the bar's owner involved. After they talked to them, there was no fight. There was nothing really more. The men just kind of left, and that was it. The bar's owner was located at this time. His name was Steve, and he said that, that was pretty much it. He talked to them, and they went on their way without a fight. It appeared to investigators that after these men went to these bars, they poofed into thin air, which they knew wasn't possible. Something had occurred, and the longer it took to find answers, the more horrific the possibilities got. Investigators were getting plenty of tips of hunters due to this being the typical hunting season. It was at its prime. They were getting, people saying, "Oh, I saw hunters here." They were also getting people saying that they had seen David and Brian in the White Cloud area where the cabin was, but it was found that these people who were saying, "Oh yeah, we saw them in White Cloud," they would say this on the news in front of the camera. And then when investigators came to them, they would say they actually didn't know anything. And so it was more like they just wanted some publicity. They just wanted to be on the news than actually be helpful. So at this point, investigators didn't believe that they ever made it out of the Mayo area. Then a month later, a lone witness came forward from Mayo, and he was named Larry Barker. Now, he said that, that weekend, a Ford Bronco did pull into his driveway, and there were 2 men inside. They were asking for directions. He believed that this was Brian and David, and unfortunately he couldn't remember whether this was Saturday or Friday, but it was in the evening. He said they were drinking. They were also asking about an M55 gun, and they were saying they were going hunting. Now, he didn't realize that these 2 men were missing or that he could help in the investigation until a month later when he saw it on the news. But unfortunately, he didn't know any more. The next year, a year of not knowing at all where these men had gone, another witness came forward saying that he had seen 2 hunters on his property around this time, and he said that this was in the Bronco and there were 4 men inside, and he told them to leave. He was brought in to identify the Bronco to see if it really was David's. However, he said, "Oh, actually, it wasn't that one." David and Brian were believed to be deceased by this time, but the investigation, although it had slowed, had not stopped yet. This was mainly due to the random tips that kept coming in throughout the years, but none that actually led to finding them. And all they needed was one that would blow the lid off of this investigation and the secrets that kept it from being solved. The families had almost given up hope that they would be able to find and bury their sons. They had actually driven all across Michigan to post flyers, hoping that somebody had seen something. They even had a theory that the car had driven off the road and into this huge dam in the area, so they paid for a helicopter to fly them above the water to look and see if they could find anything. But neither Brian nor David used their credit card, health insurance, or social security number since that weekend. Unsolved Mysteries then covered this case, and a $100,000 reward was posted. David's mother said that people don't just disappear, and she believed that they would be found. Everyone said to her that she had to be realistic, but she didn't believe she had to be. And she said that not having answers actually gave her hope that they may still be alive. Brian's parents were pleading with someone, anyone, to come forward, and meanwhile, investigators were having private pilots actually search the area on land, on water, and they were using infrared cameras. There were also divers using sonar equipment, and they got Interpol involved as well. They had gone through 3 generations of detectives because it had been that long since these men went missing, and they were still searching, but nothing was providing answers. Investigators didn't believe that they had run away, but they also had no leads that something happened to them. And eventually, David's wife was granted a divorce, and she actually went on to remarry because she had to move on with her life. Then 15 years later, in 2000, Crime Stoppers got a tip from a man named Daniel. He not only had a tip, but he said that he believed he heard a confession from the killers' mouths. Daniel said that these killers were 2 men who said that they killed 2 hunters with a hatchet in front of a bar and then put them in a river. He actually had their names, and he said that they were Dennis and Artie Mahay, brothers who were from the area. He said that these 2 men said that they killed David and Brian because they were mouthy. This informant also added in that he had seen this Bronco 3 times in the area after they disappeared. He also made it very clear that these were not the only murders he was aware of, but he didn't say more. Investigators immediately searched for these men, Dennis and Artie Mahay, but they weren't finding anybody by that name. It was like they didn't exist, so they thought this was a complete dead end once again. But even though their names were not correct, investigators started hearing about brothers in the area who were known to be not so innocent themselves. You see, investigators soon learned from whispers across town that there were 2 men named Raymond and Donald Duvall. Now, they went by JR and Coco to their friends, and they were also 52 and 51, and they belonged to a gang which consisted of their 7 brothers. As kids, they were known to have tied up their youngest brother, hung him from a tree, and left him there for quite a long time. Everyone in the community knew that especially Raymond and Donald were very close. They heavily drank every weekend, they threatened everyone in the community, and they would live in small cabins and trailers in the woods, and they would often hunt for their own food. They had to steal electricity and anything else to survive because their only means of income was actually selling parts from stolen cars. All their exes and current wives and girlfriends were terrified of them, and even investigators in the area knew that if you stopped a Duvall, you needed backup. Slowly but surely, more and more stories were catching investigators' attention when they were hearing about the Duvalls. It appeared that even more had heard the same story from the mouth of the Duvalls about these murders. Most of these stories started at the Linker's bar and ended with death. However, some stories of the disposal were more gruesome than the others, and one actually talked about them not being dropped in a river, but being fed to pigs. After hearing this, a patrol officer in the area actually admitted that he had not told the full truth, and that he had actually gotten a call from Linker's bar that weekend about a bar fight. But he didn't go because most of the time the officers would just let the bar fights take care of themselves. Now, just like him, most of the investigators in the area didn't say much, didn't help the investigators who had come from out of town, which investigators who were trying to solve this case would soon learn why. This is when investigators found out that one of Raymond's ex-girlfriends, who had had 2 of his children, had actually been murdered. This murder happened in 1994, 9 years after the disappearance of the 2 hunters. Her name was Eileen, and during her trial, Raymond actually testified that her husband, Nelson, had actually murdered her. And so did Raymond's best friend, Robert, who was known to suffer from PTSD from serving. Now, the strange thing was both Raymond and Robert had been looked into for her murder because Robert had been found driving around Eileen's body, the one that had been murdered and dumped in the middle of the road. Where she was dumped in the middle of the road was also where Raymond lived. It was down the street. She had also been run over again and again, and they were both cleared. And so then her husband Nelson was convicted instead. However, the defense believed that Raymond had killed Eileen to cover up the fact that she knew about the hunters' murders and was going to come forward with the information. That is when State Trooper Robert Lineski was given the duty to solve this case. He was actually given a whole bunch of cases when the previous trooper was retiring. However, he especially gravitated toward the hunters' case due to so many rumors and allegations that these men were the killers and nothing was ever done. And so he started to look into it more, and by 1998 he said that he wasn't going to give up easily. That he actually kept a shovel in his trunk and would dig random holes looking for the men's bodies or any evidence or their car. He was determined to find someone who not only witnessed it happen, the fight, but also witnessed their murders, but at the same time would testify. He knew that this was a hard feat because most people in this town were terrified of these brothers. I mean, to the point where they would run the other direction if anybody asked them about the Duvalls. Not only people of the town, but also investigators, people in high power. The Duvalls scared everyone. There was property damage, there were dogs being killed, and everybody was threatened with their lives, their families' lives, if they knew something and they were going to tell. If the Duvalls thought that they could implicate them in the murder, they would be harassed. And if they weren't terrified, they had already passed away all those years prior and couldn't say anything. But after nearly 2 decades of searching, the work that Lesneski did finally paid off. A witness was found. Not one who had heard the rumors or thought they knew something, but one who had actually witnessed 2 men being killed. That's when Lesneski knew he had the killers. Once their names were leaked and before they were arrested, the media actually tried to get an interview outside of their home. The owner of this home said there was no comment and then told a reporter over the phone that his family was not to be bothered. Witnesses were then placed under police protection. The Duvall brothers were finally arrested in May of 2003, 18 years after David and Brian's disappearance. During the trial, star witness Barbara Boudreau would tell the truth. She would say that during this time, she lived about a mile away from Linker's bar. And that Sunday night, she and a friend were actually at the bar. And she was just kind of hanging out, doing her own thing. And that is when Brian and David actually walked in. One of them actually ended up rubbing against her inappropriately, and she kind of told him off. And so at that point, they left her alone. But she had told them to, keep their hands to themselves. During that conversation, they'd actually asked her if she wanted to play pool for some money, and she said no. So she was very aware of these hunters and them being there. And that's when the Duvall brothers, Raymond and Donald, walked through the door, and they had another brother with them. Because like I said, there were 7 Duvall brothers, and the youngest was Rex, who was with them as well. Beverly had kind of witnessed Brian and David creating a disturbance, acting kind of nasty is how she said it. And then when she went to call the police, it was already done, so she thought that it was off of her hands. She then heard Donald Duvall talking on the phone to somebody saying that they needed help, they needed backup. It was more like, come down here and help us, fight these men, than saying, oh, we need help, we're scared. Rex then left the bar and came back with another friend as well, and that is when Beverly and her friend left the bar and walked home. However, they were watching a movie when later that night they heard screaming happening from outside, and somebody was asking for help, and so, they immediately looked and were trying to see what was happening, and that is when they snuck outside and hid behind a bush. And when they got closer, she heard a man saying, "You are dead, you rotten mother effer." That is when she would hear the sound of metal hitting something, which turned out to be a human. Beverly and her friend decided to stay right there. They were kind of more frozen, waiting to see what was going on, but they were still hidden behind these bushes, and that's when Beverly saw a Bronco and a pickup truck. And a man she had seen at the bar, one of the hunters, trying to get away, but was being held back. And this is Brian, who was getting restrained, but he actually had the better end of the bargain here because David was being beaten and he was on the ground screaming for help. Donald then hit David with the metal bat, and then Raymond punched and kicked him, and that's when Beverly and her friend witnessed his murder. Donald had hit David in the head so hard that it exploded. Brian, who had watched this happen to his best friend in horror, collapsed to the ground, completely distraught. He even peed his pants because he had just seen what had happened, and he knew it was also going to happen to him. And he was right, because Donald and Raymond began laughing that he had peed his pants and then went after him. At that point, Beverly went inside. She didn't want to see anything else. And a few minutes later, she got a knock on the door. She knew she had to open it, and she saw Raymond and Donald staring back at her, telling her that they knew her family and that she saw nothing, heard nothing, and would say nothing. They also said that the pigs had to eat too. After the Duvall brothers left, Beverly and her friend knew that they were already seen, and so they decided to actually follow them in the Bronco to see where they disposed of these bodies. And they followed them to a clearing, but that's when they actually drove past because they didn't want them to know they were there. And so they went back a little while later and found blood in this clearing, but the bodies weren't there. She also knew that the Bronco had been taken apart in a gray building on the corner and sold. The friend who had been with her had died in those 18 years since, so he couldn't really corroborate her story, but Beverly said that she tried to come forward with this. She was even having an affair with one of the officers at the time, and it was the county sheriff actually. And she told him, but actually said that she would not be testifying. She would not say that it was her who came forward if he ended up saying her name because she was so scared. She had had 2 of her dogs killed every time she tried to speak up, and she was also told that she had very pretty granddaughters. Beverly also admitted that the first time Lineski talked to her, she had lied to him because she knew that he was going to get her killed. She had told him she would never go on the record saying anything. However, Lineski had changed her mind because all those years later, she is the one that solved this case. She didn't want the reward after finally telling the truth. The Duvall's lawyer was saying that she was lying, that she was wanting to frame them. And it didn't help that the prosecution's star witness, Beverly, had been drinking the night of the murder. She said she had about 9 drinks before watching this occur, and she had also been depressed since, so she was on a lot of medication. Yet the prosecution had many more witnesses than just Beverly, who were going to testify about the Duvall brothers and how they really were. One man said he knew them for about 20 years and that they even rented a place from him, and when he wanted to evict them, they threatened that they would do the same to him that they did to the hunters. A cousin of the Duvalls said that she heard them talking about the 2 hunters at the bar. She heard that Donald was beaten up by these men who threw him into a truck, and that's why they attacked them. When Raymond heard that they had gone after his brother Donald, he fought them, put them in a shredder, and fed them to pigs. She had been questioned by police. She didn't say a word because she was too scared. And the ex-husband of that witness said the same story, and that he knew that they would get threats if they testified. It wasn't until these men were actually in custody that so many more people around town were suddenly saying, yeah, we know what happened. because they had known all those years and didn't want to be the first to say. An ex-girlfriend of Donald, who actually lived with him at the time, said that Raymond lived across the street and kept pigs. It was 3 days after the murders when Rex Duvall actually pulled up in the black Ford Bronco, and Raymond told him to get that effing thing out of there before they all got caught. She also heard Donald come home crying one night saying that he had killed somebody, and when she started asking about it, he called her an effing B, saying not to say anything. And the next morning she tried to get more out of him, and he told her to shut up or he would kill her too. Another witness said that she was at the bar when some of the missing persons posters were put up of the hunters, and Raymond looked at her and simply said that he had cut them up and ate what was left. Witness after witness discussed being too afraid of the brothers to say anything prior. Donald and Raymond testified that they didn't kill or threaten anyone. Donald and Raymond's little brother Rex said that he didn't kill the men, but he did help transport the bodies. And another one of their brothers, named Kenny, did a taped interview where he admitted to selling parts of their Bronco for money. However, he was asked to testify on the stand. He got on the stand, and suddenly he didn't remember anything. He said that he suffered a stroke and was now also suffering from Alzheimer's and couldn't remember it. 3 months of trial later, after 2 hours of deliberation, Raymond and Donald were found guilty and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. This was a difficult feat considering there were no physical evidence pointing in their direction. The amount of witnesses that they had, however, really pulled the jury and sent them over the edge. And so Raymond actually at this point told David and Brian's families in the courtroom that he couldn't feel remorse because he didn't do it. David's sister said that when they wake up in the morning, they will hear David's screams. Brian's mother said that they deprived her of having grandchildren. Donald filed an appeal claiming that the hearsay testimony was allowed, but this was denied. And up until 2009, there were actually tips flooding in about where these bodies may be located and the dumping ground of David and Brian. However, their bodies have still not been recovered, and the case remains open due to others possibly being charged. And investigators believe that there were actually 3 other men involved, possibly more Duvall brothers. A police officer who worked this case said it was 3 levels below Deliverance, the nightmarish movie about backwood inbreds who stalk and assault a group of guys on a river trip. He said, "I've been around people like this in another state. They think they're a law unto themselves. They might make people disappear and think nothing of it." 7 years later, the police were still looking for David and Brian's bodies, and they used infrared cameras and a helicopter to actually search the land. The state trooper Lineski got a tip from an undercover police officer who was friends with somebody who were friends with the Duvalls, and that is when they heard about a property. And this was in the Minter Township where the bodies could be found. After searching with a helicopter, they found several spots where they wanted to look into deeper. Because with the infrared cameras, they could actually pick up on the freshly dug land due to heat signatures being different with the loosened earth. They wanted to take cadaver dogs to these areas, and as of this year, I don't know if they've gone to those areas, but the bodies have still not been found, and I could not find any more about it. Many people do believe that these men were fed to the pigs. Now, true crime author Tom Henderson has since written a book about this case called The Darkest Night. But do you believe the Duvall family really fed David and Brian to the pigs? Were they the killers? Because there was no physical evidence, just many people who heard them say they did it. If so, do you believe that there were more people involved in the murders and the disposal? Possibly one of the witnesses who obviously wouldn't want to implicate themselves in it? Was Eileen killed by her ex Raymond? Or was it really her husband who murdered her? Was she trying to come forward to police and she was no longer going to cover for her ex, and that's what got her murdered? I'd love to hear what you think as always. I cannot believe it took nearly 2 decades for this case to be solved, but thank goodness for Beverly for finally finding the courage to stand up, even after she had witnessed the threats, and not only just threats, she had seen the murders happen. She had seen them come to her door and threaten her. She had heard all of this, and then she saw even her dogs being killed. This woman had really seen it all. She knew they weren't kidding. She knew what they were capable of. And she had enough strength to help solve this case. Because without her, it probably would still be unsolved to this day. And I think that it's really a good example of bystander effect. You know, it is a little bit different because everybody knew about the threats and what they would really do. But when everybody is scared, when everybody thinks maybe somebody else will talk and I won't have to, that's when nothing happens. And Beverly broke that cycle. So I also, urge you to break that cycle as well. And always be the one to speak out if no one else can. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.